The airport terminal was alive with the usual cacophony of rushing feet, overhead announcements, and the hum of travelers glued to their phones or engaged in quiet conversations with family members. It was another busy morning at New York's JFK airport, but there was something undeniably tense about the crowd that gathered. Around gate 17, Marcus stepped into the line with a quiet, purposeful presence, his tailored navy blue suit fitting him like a second skin. His polished black leather shoes clicked softly against the marble floor, an echo of his solid confidence, a man who had arrived at his position through decades of hard work, who had long since mastered the art of blending into any setting, yet standing out at the same time. The other passengers were absorbed in their own worlds, lost in the shuffle. Some distracted by their phones, others focused on their luggage. Marcus, however, carried an air of quiet assurance, one that said he belonged where he was, in first class, and that no amount of stress or rushing would take that from him. In his hand was his boarding pass for Flight 482, a direct route to London, first-class ticket that would ensure a smooth journey across the Atlantic. Everything had been confirmed, from the flight to the seat, to the time. There was no reason to doubt that it would go smoothly. Yet as Marcus approached the desk, he immediately noticed a change in the energy. The young gate agent, a woman in her early 20s, with dark hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun, didn't look up as he stepped forward. She was busy tapping away at the computer keyboard, her hands moving quickly, almost mechanically, as though she had done this thousands of times before. She barely acknowledged Marcus's presence. He cleared his throat, just enough to get her attention, but not in a way that would make her feel rushed or pressured. It was the kind of subtle gesture that someone like him would make when he wanted to establish that he was in control without having to raise his voice. She looked up at him, briefly glancing at the ticket in his hand, before giving a quick nod. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice flat, without any hint of warmth. Marcus didn't let the tone faze him. He had heard far worse in boardrooms. "I believe you have my flight ready," Marcus said smoothly, handing over his first-class ticket. He'd done this hundreds of times in his life, checked in, had his bags weighed. The gate agent scanned his pass, and he'd moved on. It was a routine, a ritual almost. But today something was different. The agent took the ticket from him with the same mechanical efficiency he had grown used to, scanning it through the system. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, pausing for a moment before her face shifted slightly, just enough for Marcus to notice the tension in her jaw. There was a brief flicker of hesitation, but it was enough. Marcus's instincts were sharp, honed over the years of negotiating deals, reading people's expressions, sensing when something wasn't right. He felt it now. "I'm sorry, sir, but your ticket isn't valid," she said, her voice still flat, but with an undercurrent of finality. Marcus blinked, his brow furrowing slightly. "I don't think there's any mistake. I confirmed my flight this morning, first class." The gate agent didn't look up. She simply slid the ticket back across the counter and reached for a small tear-off machine. "Please, just let me confirm again," Marcus replied, maintaining his calm, refusing to be rattled. He wasn't going to let this go without an explanation. The agent's fingers typed furiously, her attention now focused on the screen in front of her. Marcus watched as her brow furrowed once again. There was a sense of impatience in the way she worked now, her eyes darting between the screen and the counter. But then, something unexpected happened. With a sudden, almost mechanical precision, the agent tore the ticket in half, the sound cutting through the air like the snap of a whip. Marcus's hand tightened around the counter, but he held himself back. He knew the sensation of rising frustration, the almost overwhelming urge to lash out when faced with injustice, but he wouldn't let himself fall into that trap. "I'm afraid you'll have to move to economy, sir. We've had to adjust your seating," the agent said coldly, sliding a new seat assignment toward him as though she was doing him a favor. The room was silent for a moment, the usual background noise of the airport receding as others watched the interaction unfold. Marcus could feel eyes on him, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He was used to being watched, scrutinized. It was part of his life, a reality that had been with him since he'd started climbing the corporate ladder. Still, something about this felt wrong. This wasn't just an error, a mistake in processing. No, this felt personal. He reached into his briefcase, his fingers brushing over the familiar texture of his wallet, before pulling out a small, sleek black folder. He placed it carefully on the counter between them. The folder was simple, elegant, and Marcus had carried it with him for years. Inside was a passport, his identification, as well as another item, one that wasn't typically seen in these types of interactions. The gate agent paused, her fingers hovering just above the folder. With a deliberate motion, Marcus opened it, revealing the passport first, then carefully pulling out a separate card. He slid it across the counter, the gold-embossed letters gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the terminal. For a moment, the gate agent simply stared at the card, her eyes widening slightly, her fingers frozen above the desk. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence in the air told him all he needed to know. He watched as the young woman's eyes darted from the card to him, her expression shifting. The steady, cold professionalism she had held moments ago faltered as recognition. Set in the card she was now looking at wasn't just a business card. It was his official title, one that was known in circles that reached far beyond the boardroom. The card identified him not just as a businessman, but as the founder and CEO of one of the most influential companies in the world. Marcus's eyes never left hers. The gate agent blinked, once, then again, her hands now trembling slightly. The smoothness of her earlier motions had evaporated, replaced with the unmistakable realization of what she had just done. She had torn up a first-class ticket belonging to someone who was, in this moment, more powerful than she could have imagined. Her face flushed a deep crimson, and for the first time, she lifted her gaze to meet his. The confidence that had been so firm in her posture, the rigidity of her tone, was now replaced with something closer to embarrassment. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice faltering for the first time. Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply took a deep breath and leaned in slightly, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. I think it's time we find another solution, don't you? The tension in the air was palpable now. The passengers around them had gone quiet, some watching the exchange with barely concealed curiosity. A few of them had their phones out, recording the scene, as if waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Marcus didn't care. The discomfort that was settling over the young agent, however, was exactly what he had hoped for. For a moment, she looked like she might break down and apologize, but Marcus didn't give her the satisfaction. She had crossed the line, and now, it was time for her to understand exactly who she had just tried to push aside. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick, like an invisible weight, pressing down on the entire terminal. Marcus could feel the eyes of the other passengers, their curiosity palpable, their breaths held as they watched the young gate agent grapple with the realization of her mistake. The agent's fingers shook slightly as she reached for the torn pieces of Marcus's first-class ticket, attempting to piece them back together, as though doing so would somehow undo the damage she had already done. Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands folded in front of him, giving her the space she needed to process what was happening. The entire scene felt surreal, as though time had slowed, and everything around them had become irrelevant. In the years Marcus had spent in high-powered meetings and intense negotiations, he had faced countless challenges, but this was different. This wasn't some boardroom standoff or corporate battle. No, this was something far more personal, and he wasn't about to let the gate agent off easy. The woman's gaze darted between the ticket, the card Marcus had given her, and then finally back to him. The flush on her cheeks deepened as she swallowed, her voice barely a whisper, as she spoke again. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." Her voice trailed off, as though she wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. Marcus took a slow, deliberate step forward, his calm demeanor never breaking. "You didn't mean to, but you did," he said quietly, his voice still steady but carrying a weight that made the air feel thicker. He could see the tension in her body, the way her shoulders were tense as if she were ready to break under the pressure. It was clear that she was already regretting her actions. But Marcus knew that regret alone wouldn't fix the problem she had created. She glanced around the terminal, searching for help, but none came. The other passengers, for the most part, had remained silent, their attention fixed on the exchange between the two of them. Some of them seemed to take pleasure in the discomfort of the young agent, while others watched with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Marcus could feel their eyes on him now too, but he didn't let it distract him. He knew exactly how to handle this situation. He had learned long ago that the key to any challenge was control, and he was in full control now. The gate agent, realizing she had no way to back out of this, slowly began to slide the torn ticket away from the counter, preparing to issue another one. She did so without saying a word, her face redder than ever. Marcus waited, watching her closely, observing every minute detail. He knew what she was doing. She was trying to placate him, trying to give him something to make up for the insult she had just caused. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't just about the ticket. It was about the principle of it all. "Listen," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tense silence like a knife. "I don't want your apology. I want you to understand what you've just done." She paused, her hand frozen over the ticket machine. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, and for the first time, there was something in her expression, a mix of guilt, fear, and a flicker of shame. "I understand, sir," she said, her voice small now, almost pleading. "No," Marcus replied, his tone firm. "You don't. If you did, you wouldn't have done what you did." The agent's mouth opened as if to say something, but she seemed to think better of it. Instead, she simply nodded, the movement slow and defeated. Marcus took another step, closer to the counter, leaning in just enough to make her feel his presence. He didn't raise his voice or make any grand gestures. He simply made it clear that this wasn't something he was going to let slide. "I don't know if you realize this," he continued, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable edge. "But when you treat someone like that, when you assume that they're just another face in the crowd, you've made a serious mistake. It's not about the ticket, it's about respect. It's about recognizing who you're dealing with." The agent's shoulders sagged, her posture betraying the weight of Marcus's words. She had made her mistake, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions, not in the form of some grand punishment, but in the form of a lesson that would stick with her for a long time. Marcus glanced over at the small crowd of onlookers, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the people who had been watching this unfold. Some of them were clearly uncomfortable, their eyes flicking between Marcus and the agent, while others seemed to take quiet pleasure in the unfolding drama. But Marcus didn't care about them. He turned his attention back to the agent, his laser focus. "You've just tried to humiliate someone in front of a room full of people. And for what? Because you thought you could get away with it. Because I didn't look like someone who deserved respect." Her face paled further, and Marcus could see that his words were hitting home. He wasn't just teaching her a lesson about customer service. He was teaching her about the value of people, the importance of treating others with dignity, no matter who they were. "I've been in situations like this before," Marcus said, his voice lowering, becoming more intimate, as if he were sharing a secret. "I've had people look down on me because of where I came from, what I wore, or the color of my skin. I've had them underestimate me, and I've let them. But what you tried to do wasn't just about an assumption. It was about power. You thought you had the power to decide who deserved better treatment and who didn't." The agent blinked rapidly, her lips parted as if she was struggling to find the words to respond. But there was nothing she could say to defend herself. She had crossed a line, and Marcus wasn't about to let her off easily. He paused, giving her a moment to process what he had said. The tension between them hung in the air, thick and palpable. The sound of the bustling airport seemed distant now, muted under the weight of this exchange. Marcus's words had struck a nerve, and he could see it. Finally, the agent cleared her throat, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to ... she began, but Marcus stopped her. "I know," he said simply, "but meaning is never enough. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. Actions have consequences." The agent's eyes welled up with tears, the weight of the moment crashing down on her all at once. For the first time, she seemed truly vulnerable, no longer a gate agent or a young woman behind a counter, but just someone who had made a mistake. Marcus felt a flicker of something deep within him. It wasn't sympathy, not exactly. It was more like understanding. He had been there before, made his own share of mistakes, and had to learn from them. But he also knew that some mistakes couldn't just be brushed away. They had to be confronted, faced head-on. With a final glance at the ticket machine, Marcus straightened up. "Give me my new seat assignment," he said, his voice firm but no longer angry. The agent hesitated for a moment before reaching for the printer, her hands still trembling slightly. She printed out a new ticket, this time for a seat in first class. She handed it to him silently, not meeting his eyes. Marcus looked down at the ticket, and for a brief moment, the weight of the situation seemed to lift. But only for a moment. He wasn't done yet. He still had to make sure the young woman understood the lesson she had learned today. As he took the ticket, he looked at her one last time, his gaze steady. "Remember this moment. Don't let it be just another incident in your day. Make sure you treat everyone the same, no matter who they are." The agent nodded, her face still flushed, but now with something more than shame. There was regret there, and perhaps a seed of growth. As Marcus turned to leave, the whispers behind him resumed, but this time they weren't filled with the same kind of curiosity. They were filled with a new kind of respect, and for Marcus, that was enough. The hum of the airport resumed its usual rhythm as Marcus moved away from Gate 17, his mind processing everything that had just unfolded. The people behind him, the ones who had been witness to the exchange, slowly returned to their own concerns. Phones were tucked back into bags, briefcases closed with a quiet snap, and the soft clattering of rolling suitcases filled the air once more. But for Marcus, it wasn't over. The encounter lingered, not just in the pit of his stomach but in his thoughts, and as he walked toward the boarding area, he couldn't help but replay the moment over and over again. He had seen it in her eyes. The gate agent, the young woman, who had made the mistake. At first it was pure arrogance, a feeling of power that came with the assumption that she could control someone's fate simply by looking at them. But that had quickly shifted when she realized who Marcus was, what he represented, and in that shift, he saw a kind of human vulnerability that was rare, especially in people like her who believed they held all the cards. What she had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a reflection of how she saw the world, and it was a glimpse into the darker side of human nature. Power, privilege, and the assumption that others were beneath it. Marcus had made his point, and in that moment, he knew it. Had landed, she wasn't just sorry because she'd been caught. She was sorry because the harsh reality of her actions had finally hit home. People like her, the ones who worked behind counters, who were often overlooked or judged as just service workers, often felt like they had no power, no voice. But that didn't give them the right to decide who deserved respect and who didn't. The sad truth was that, in the grand scheme of things, people like Marcus, with his wealth and influence, were seen as more deserving, even if they hadn't done anything to earn that kind of reverence. As Marcus approached the boarding area, he could feel the weight of his position settling back into place. He was a CEO, a leader, a man who made decisions that impacted thousands of lives every day. The life he lived was one of power and privilege, but it wasn't always as glamorous as people believed. He had worked for everything he had fought, for every inch, and sacrificed more than most would ever understand. But it wasn't just about the things he had built or the empire he had created. It was about the respect he demanded, not out of ego, but out of necessity. Respect was the currency that allowed him to navigate the complex web of business and influence, to move through the world as though it were his domain. And when that respect was threatened, when it was challenged in the way the gate agent had done, it wasn't just his pride on the line. It was the foundation of everything he had worked for. He passed through the security checks, his movements smooth and deliberate, as he entered the gate lounge. There was still time before boarding, and he found an empty seat by the window. The plane was already visible out on the tarmac, its sleek fuselage gleaming under the early morning sun. Marcus stared at it for a moment, watching as the ground crew moved around it, preparing it for takeoff. The constant buzz of activity in the airport continued, but Marcus's thoughts remained focused on the woman at the gate. In that brief exchange, he had been given a rare glimpse into her world. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the moment when her arrogance crumbled under the weight of her mistake. It wasn't enough to just let it slide. He could have icily walked away, taken his seat in first class, and continued with his life. But Marcus wasn't the type to let people get away with ignorance. He wasn't the type to let them go on believing that their actions wouldn't have consequences. She needed to understand that she had crossed a line, and he had made sure that she knew it. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at her. It was about making sure that the lessons stuck. It was about making sure that the lessons stuck. Marcus didn't believe in idle apologies or empty gestures. He believed in lessons that were earned, lessons that were hard, because those were the ones that lasted. The young agent had apologized, but it wasn't enough. She would leave that moment behind her, yes, but the weight of it would follow her. He had made sure of that. The boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker, cutting through his thoughts. It was time to board, and Marcus stood up, adjusting his jacket and walking toward the gate. The crowd had already started to form, passengers jockeying for position in the line, eager to settle into their seats and begin their journey. But Marcus didn't hurry. He didn't need to. He was in first class, and he knew that the flight would wait for him. As he approached the gate, he caught sight of the young woman again. She was standing at the counter, her face pale, her posture slumped. She hadn't looked up when Marcus walked past her, but he could feel her eyes on him. He could feel the weight of her gaze, heavy with guilt and regret. She didn't say anything. There was no attempt to apologize again, no awkward conversation. She had learned the lesson, and now there was nothing left to say. Marcus kept walking, not out of spite, but because there was no reason to linger. There was no need to rub it in. He had made his point, and he was content with that. As he settled into his seat in first class, Marcus gazed out the window once more. The engines roared to life, and the plane slowly taxied away from the gate. He had done what he came here to do, both professionally and personally. He had asserted his authority, made sure that his presence was acknowledged, and sent a message to anyone who thought they could disrespect him. But he also realized something at that moment. It wasn't just about the power he wielded in the corporate world. It wasn't just about being the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. No, it was about something deeper. It was about the way people saw themselves, the way they interacted with others, and the assumptions they made about who was worthy of respect and who wasn't. For Marcus, it wasn't enough to just be respected. He wanted to inspire respect in others, to make people think twice before they judged someone based on appearance or status. He wanted people to understand that respect had to be earned, that it wasn't something you could just take for granted. And he wasn't just talking about the young agent at the gate. He was talking about the world as a whole, about the way power was so often abused and used to control others. He wanted to change that, in whatever small way he could. As the plane lifted off the ground, Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, leaning back in his seat. The hum of the engines, the sound of the air outside, it all seemed to fade away as he let himself drift into thought. This flight, this moment, was just another chapter in a long story. He had faced adversity, dealt with challenges, and come out on top time and time again. But what mattered now, what truly mattered, was that the lessons he had learned over the years were shaping him into someone who wasn't just focused on his own success. He was focused on something greater. In the end, it wasn't about making an example out of someone who had made a mistake. It was about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their position or their power, understood the importance of respect, of empathy, and of treating others with dignity. It wasn't about showing off or flaunting his status. It was about using his position to challenge the world's assumptions and making sure that the lessons of today stuck with people long after they had forgotten the details. As the flight continued its journey across the sky, Marcus knew this wasn't the last time he would encounter people who underestimated him or anyone else. But he also knew that he would continue to fight against those assumptions, to challenge the idea that power could only belong to a few. And with each step, each decision, he would continue to build, not just an empire, but a legacy. The cabin lights glowed softly with that golden hue reserved for first class, where every detail was designed to exude comfort and exclusivity. Marcus sat back in his spacious leather seat, watching the bustle of other passengers finding their places in the rows behind him. The hum of the engines was steady, a low vibration that seemed to mirror the calm expression on his face. Yet beneath that calm his mind was alive, turning over the events at the gate, and the subtle power shift that had occurred in those few tense minutes. Flight attendants moved through the aisle with quiet efficiency, their voices polite, their gestures practiced to perfection, offering champagne and warm towels before takeoff. Marcus accepted a glass not because he needed it, but because it was part of the ritual, part of the silent acknowledgement that he belonged here. As he sipped, he caught himself glancing toward the curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane. Somewhere back there the young gate agent would still be at the terminal, perhaps already serving the next line of passengers, but Marcus knew the scene they shared would linger with her far longer than the boarding announcements she would hear for the rest of her shift. His thoughts drifted not toward anger, but toward the memory of how often in his early years he had been on the receiving end of such dismissive treatment. There had been business trips where hotel clerks barely looked up from their desks, colleagues who ignored him until they realized his ideas held weight in meetings, where his presence was quietly questioned until his performance proved otherwise. He had learned to turn those moments into fuel, but he also knew not everyone could. That was why moments like today mattered, because they chipped away at the assumptions that created those injustices. In the first place, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring, announcing the expected flight time and weather conditions in London. Marcus listened absently, his eyes drifting to the window where the lights of New York shimmered in the distance, ready to vanish beneath the clouds. As the plane rolled toward the runway, he felt the familiar mix of anticipation and detachment that came with business travel. Another city, another meeting, another deal to secure. Yet this trip already carried a different kind of weight because of what had happened before the boarding call. The plane surged forward, engines roaring, and Marcus felt the push of acceleration pressing him into his seat. The city lights blurred, and then disappeared beneath them as the aircraft climbed into the dark expanse of the night sky. He breathed slowly, feeling the tension from earlier finally begin to loosen its grip. The hum of the cabin mixed with the faint clink of glassware and the whisper of conversation from other first-class passengers, but for Marcus, the noise faded into the background as his thoughts sharpened once again on the lesson of the morning. Flight attendant returned to offer dinner service menus, and Marcus accepted him with a nod. As she walked away, he noticed her posture, her tone, her warm professionalism. It struck him that service like this wasn't about servitude. It was about pride in one's role and commitment to treating each passenger with the same level of care. The difference between her and the gate agent wasn't just training, it was mindset. Respect flowed naturally from people who valued it in themselves and extended it to others. Dinner arrived on fine china, with silverware that gleamed under the cabin lights. Marcus ate slowly, appreciating the quality, but thinking about the contrast between the refined quiet of this moment and the chaos that had unfolded at the gate. Somewhere between the taste of the perfectly seasoned salmon and the rich aroma of the wine, he began to wonder whether the young agent would talk about what happened today. Would she share it with her co-workers, framing him as a difficult passenger, or would she quietly hold it as a moment that shifted something inside her perspective, a moment that made her more careful, more measured in her judgments? Halfway through the meal, Marcus took out his tablet, unlocking it with a quick gesture and opening a file that held his schedule for the week ahead. Meetings in London, presentations for potential investors, dinners with partners from across Europe. His life was a constant flow of responsibilities, decisions, and negotiations. Yet he knew that the strength of his position came not just from his ability to lead, but from the respect he commanded from those around him. That respect was not negotiable, and the moment someone tried to diminish it, they learned quickly why he stood where he did. The flight stretched on the hours marked by quiet service and the occasional flicker of turbulence. Marcus used the time to draft a few messages and review notes, but the image of the gate agent kept intruding into his thoughts. He imagined her returning home, replaying the incident in her mind, perhaps telling herself that she would do things differently next time. The possibility that she might carry that lesson forward gave him a quiet sense of satisfaction, not born of arrogance, but of knowing that he had used his influence for something more than personal gain. Eventually the cabin dimmed as passengers settled in for rest. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes, but sleep didn't come immediately. Instead, he found himself thinking about the broader implications of what had happened. In his company, he had worked to dismantle barriers that kept people from seeing each other as equals. He had created programs to mentor young professionals who came from backgrounds like his own, where the odds were stacked against them. Moments like this one at the gate were a reminder of why that work mattered so much, because change didn't just happen in boardrooms or through policy. It happened in these small personal confrontations where assumptions were challenged and respect was demanded somewhere over the Atlantic. Marcus finally drifted into sleep, his mind still carrying fragments of the day's events. When he woke hours later, the first glow of dawn was spilling across the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of gold and crimson. The beauty of it struck him even through the thick cabin window, and for a moment he simply watched in silence, appreciating the calm after the storm of the previous day. Breakfast was served soon after, and Marcus engaged politely with the flight attendant, though his thoughts were already turning toward the day ahead. London awaited him with its familiar grey skies and relentless pace, but this trip would carry with it the subtle echo of what had happened back in New York. He would step into his meetings with the same confidence as always, but somewhere deep inside he would be reminded that every interaction, no matter how small, had the potential to leave a lasting mark. The descent began with the engines humming with a deeper pitch as the plane angled toward Heathrow. Marcus straightened his jacket, checked his watch, and prepared himself for the rhythm of the day to come. The city spread out below him, a patchwork of streets and rooftops, under a soft morning haze. When the wheels touched down, he felt the gentle jolt that signaled the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Yet this one felt different, because in the quiet space between departure and arrival, he had been reminded that leadership wasn't just about guiding a company, it was about guiding moments, guiding people even when those people were strangers, met only for a minute at an airport gate. As the doors opened and passengers began to file out, Marcus moved with unhurried steps, his presence once again quiet yet commanding. He knew his path, and he knew that somewhere across the ocean, back in that bustling terminal, a young woman would remember the moment she tore up a ticket and met a man who refused to accept being diminished. The brisk morning air of London greeted Marcus as he stepped out of the terminal, a cool breeze carrying with it the familiar scent of the city, a mixture of damp stone, fresh coffee, and the distant hint of exhaust from the endless streams of taxis and buses that moved through the airport. Approach roads. He stood for a moment, adjusting his tie and scanning the area until he spotted his driver, a tall man in a dark overcoat, holding a simple sign that read Marcus in bold letters. The driver moved forward with a respectful nod, taking Marcus's leather briefcase and guiding him toward a sleek black sedan waiting at the curb, its paint gleaming under the muted sunlight of the overcast London sky. The car's interior was warm and quiet, offering a sharp contrast to the chaotic flow of travelers still pouring out of the terminal. Marcus settled into the back seat, his mind already shifting gears from the flight to the tasks ahead. The driver pulled smoothly into traffic, heading toward the heart of the city where meetings, negotiations, and high-level discussions awaited. Yet despite the full schedule before him, the incident at JFK still lingered in his thoughts, not with anger but with the weight of unfinished reflection. He kept replaying the look in the young gate agent's eyes when she realized who he was, that split second when her confidence cracked and her assumptions shattered. The car glided past familiar streets as London revealed itself in fragments. Narrow lanes flanked by historic brick buildings, bustling intersections alive with pedestrians, the shimmer of the Thames beneath grey skies. Marcus had always admired the city's ability to blend its history with its modern pulse, but today he saw it differently. Every face in the crowd, every hurried commuter, every shopkeeper and executive was a reminder of the diversity of human experience and the silent judgments people made every day, often without realizing it. His encounter in New York had been one moment in a sea of such moments, but it had reminded him of something vital. The way people treat each other was often shaped by what they thought they saw, not by what they truly knew. The driver dropped Marcus at a towering glass building in a financial district, its reflective facade mirroring the sky and the streets below. Inside the lobby, the air was warm and faintly scented with polished wood and fresh flowers. Marcus was greeted immediately by the receptionist, who knew him by name, offering a genuine smile and welcoming him back. This kind of reception was standard in his world, and yet it underscored the difference between environments where respect was given freely and those where it was measured out based on perception. He took the private elevator to the top floor, where his team was already assembled in a conference room lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. They rose as he entered, not out of obligation, but out of the mutual respect they had built over years of working together. Marcus acknowledged them with a nod and took his place at the head of the long table, laying his briefcase beside him. The morning's meeting was focused on a major merger, a deal that would expand their influence across new markets and create thousands of jobs. The discussion was sharp and focused, with each member of his team contributing insights, strategies, and forecasts. Yet even as the conversation moved from financial projections to legal considerations, Marcus found his mind pulling at the thread of what had happened at the airport. The gate agent's mistake had been rooted in an assumption about status and appearance, but the same underlying bias could creep into any setting, even in high-level corporate environments. He thought about how many deals had been lost or opportunities missed because someone underestimated the wrong person. It was a dangerous flaw in judgment, one that could cost not just individuals but entire companies their future. When the meeting concluded, Marcus stayed behind for a few minutes, gazing out at the city as the room emptied. The skyline stretched into the distance, a blend of old stone towers and sleek modern spires. He could see the movement of people far below, tiny from this height, but each one carrying their own ambitions, fears, and stories. It struck him again that leadership was not just about directing those stories from above, but about engaging with them directly at ground level. It was about making sure the people who followed you understood that respect was a non-negotiable currency in any interaction. The rest of the day passed in a steady rhythm of back-to-back engagements. Lunch with an international investor whose handshake carried decades of experience and caution. A tour of a tech facility where young engineers spoke with passionate intensity about their latest breakthroughs. A quiet dinner with a small group of trusted partners where strategies for the next 5 years were discussed over glasses of fine wine. Through it all, Marcus was present, engaged and decisive. Yet the lesson of the gate, the agent kept threading its way through his thoughts like a shadow he could not ignore. By the time he returned to his hotel late that evening, the city outside was alive with the glow of streetlights and the hum of nightlife. He stepped into the quiet of his suite, its large windows offering a sweeping view of the Thames winding through the city like a dark ribbon under the scattered lights of bridges. He loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of water, standing by the window as he considered the next morning's agenda. Yet his thoughts refused to stay fixed on the business at hand. Instead, circling back to the woman at gate 17, he imagined her recounting the story to friends or family, perhaps leaving out details that cast her in the harshest light, perhaps admitting to herself that she had been wrong. He hoped she would remember the way he had held his ground without raising his voice, the way he had made her confront the truth of her actions without humiliating her beyond what she had brought upon herself. Because that was the key, not to crush someone under the weight of their mistake, but to ensure the lesson stayed with them long after the moment had passed. Sitting at the small desk in the corner, Marcus opened his laptop and began drafting a note to his leadership team back home. It was not about the gate agent specifically, but about the broader theme of respect and perception in professional environments. He wrote about the importance of meeting each person without assumption of their worth based on appearance or perceived status, about how easily opportunities could be lost when bias went unchecked, and about the responsibility of leaders to model the respect they expected from others. He emphasized that these principles applied not only within the company but in every interaction, because the brand they represented was as much about values as it was about products or profits. When he was done, he read through the message once more, feeling a quiet satisfaction in its clarity. It was more than a memo. It was a call to action, a reminder to everyone in his orbit that they were part of a culture that valued dignity above all else. He sent it, knowing it would spark conversations that might ripple outward in ways he could not predict. The city outside his window was settling into its late-night rhythm, now the traffic thinning, the glow of neon signs reflecting in the slow-moving river. Marcus finished his water and prepared for bed, his mind finally beginning to quiet. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more decisions and more challenges, but tonight he felt a sense of alignment between his values and his actions. The confrontation at the gate had not been something he sought yet. It had served as a reminder of why he carried himself the way he did, why he demanded respect, and why he gave it in return. He turned off the lights and lay down. The darkness of the room wrapped around him, and the low hum of the city became a lullaby. He thought one last time about the woman at gate 17, and hoped that somewhere she too was reflecting on the encounter, not with resentment, but with the understanding that it had been a turning point. One of those small, sharp moments that could change the trajectory of how a person moved through the world. The morning in London began with a pale light breaking through the clouds, bathing the city in a soft glow that hinted at the possibility of clear skies later in the day. Marcus woke early, his mind already sharp and ready to meet the demands that lay ahead. The events at JFK had followed him across the ocean, lingering in his thoughts through meetings and dinners, but today felt different. Today was about closure, not just in his schedule but in the quiet, personal thread of this story that had woven itself into his journey. He dressed in a crisp grey suit, the kind that spoke of understated power and precision, tying his silk tie with practiced ease before stepping out into the cool morning air. His driver was waiting, and the ride to his first meeting took him through the awakening streets of London, past shopkeepers raising shutters, street cleaners hosing down sidewalks, and commuters with hurried steps clutching steaming cups of coffee. The city felt alive with momentum and purpose, much like Marcus himself. Day unfolded with a rhythm that was both demanding and satisfying. High-level discussions in glass-walled boardroom, negotiations that required his full attention, and a luncheon that secured an important alliance for his company's European expansion. Marcus moved through it all with the same steady presence that had defined his career, but even as he listened to financial reports and legal briefings, a small part of his mind kept returning to the gate agent. Her face, the exact moment recognition dawned, and the unspoken weight that had passed between them by mid-afternoon. Marcus had a rare hour free before his final engagement, and instead of retreating to his hotel, he found himself at a quiet cafe near the Thames. He ordered a black coffee and took a seat by the window, watching the steady flow of people outside, each moving through their own lives, unaware of how easily a single encounter could alter a perspective forever. He thought of the countless interactions that happened in a day, each carrying the potential to build or erode respect. It struck him that the power of leadership extended far beyond boardrooms and offices. It lived in those small moments of human connection where character was tested. As he sipped his coffee, he opened his laptop to check his messages. Among the usual stream of updates from his team and partners, one email caught his attention. It was from his assistant in New York, forwarded from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was simple: "Thank you." Marcus clicked it and began to read. The message was from the gate agent. Her words were hesitant but sincere. She acknowledged the mistake she had made, not just in tearing up the ticket, but in allowing assumptions to guide her actions. She admitted that in the rush of her job, she had forgotten the simple truth that every person deserved to be treated with respect, regardless of what she thought she saw. She wrote about how the encounter had shaken her, and how she had spent the rest of that day replaying it in her mind. She had even spoken to her supervisor about the incident, not to defend herself but to take responsibility. She ended by saying she had started paying closer attention to the way she interacted with people, and had already noticed a difference in the responses she received. Marcus leaned back in his chair, reading the email a second time. There was no request for forgiveness, no attempt to soften the mistake, just a genuine acknowledgement of growth. It was exactly the kind of outcome he had hoped for when he stood his ground at Gate 17, not a public victory, but a private shift in someone's perspective that could ripple outward in ways neither of them could fully see. He typed a brief reply, expressing appreciation for her message and encouraging her to carry that awareness forward in her work and in life. It was not a long response, but it was enough to close the loop between them. The rest of the day carried on with renewed energy. His final meeting was a success, securing a deal that would anchor his company's presence in London for years to come. As the evening settled over the city, Marcus returned to his hotel feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond business achievements. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window watching the river glint under the streetlights, the slow-moving current reflecting the calm he felt inside. In the end, the incident at JFK had been more than an inconvenience or a challenge to his authority. It had been a reminder of why he led the way he did, and why he insisted on certain standards for himself and those around him. Respect was not something to be demanded with arrogance, but something to be commanded through presence, integrity, and the willingness to hold others accountable when they faltered. The gate agent's email had confirmed what he believed all along, that even the smallest confrontation handled with clarity and restraint could change the way a person moved through the world. As the night deepened, Marcus closed the curtains and prepared for the flight home the next morning. He knew the pace of his life would not slow. The meetings would continue, the challenges would evolve, and new situations would test him in ways he could not predict. But he also knew that moments like this were the true measure of leadership, the quiet, unseen victories that left no headlines but shaped character on both sides of the interaction. The following day he boarded his return flight with the same calm presence that had carried him through the initial encounter. The flight attendants greeted him warmly. The boarding process was smooth, and there was no tension in the air. As the plane lifted from the runway, Marcus gazed out at the shrinking city below and allowed himself a small, quiet smile. He had closed this chapter, not with triumph over someone else, but with the satisfaction of knowing that dignity had been preserved, and perhaps even multiplied. In that moment, he understood that the greatest victories often came without applause, without recognition, and without grand gestures. They came in the form of a changed mind, a softened heart, and the knowledge that somewhere across the ocean a young woman would approach her work and her life differently because of a conversation at an airport. The clouds swallowed the view, and the plane climbed higher into the sky, carrying Marcus back across the Atlantic toward new challenges and new stories. The hum of the engines was steady, the cabin calm, and his thoughts clear. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the quiet fill him knowing that respect once earned and given freely was the kind of wealth no one could take away. The end.